Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today I want to talk about real estate in New York and whether it is still a good investment or not. Now, what I intend to do over this video, I want to give you five firstly disadvantages of buying in New York and then five advantages, and then I will tell you what I think you should do. Now, let's go straight away to the disadvantages. And first of all, yeah, you got it, the cost. New York is insanely expensive. The average price of a co-op is $800,000 and the average price of a condo apartment is $1.4 million. So unless you've got a lot of money, which unfortunately I don't, a lot of disposable money, you're not going to buy in New York. Number two, we all know the process of buying in New York is insanely competitive. You can often find an apartment in New York, fall in love with it, and yet you get outbid. Now, number three is maintenance costs. Yeah, what do you think is the average a New Yorker has to pay for maintaining their property each month? Building maintenance. What do you think it is? Yeah, it's $1,500 a month. Now that is absolutely, again, insanely expensive, and that amounts to a year $18,000. Yeah, $18,000 just to maintain the building maintenance every year for somebody. That's a hell of a lot of money. So unless you've got a lot of money, you're not going to invest in New York. Number four, I should say, it is quite, US in general is slightly more pro-tenant than it is pro-landlord. And I say that because there have been a lot of cases where the tenant can cite distress of being evicted and sometimes remains in their apartments. So it can be quite difficult to evict somebody, and that's not just only in New York, that's the whole of the US. There's quite some strong anti-discrimination laws. And number five, which I think is quite important as well, there's a limited choice in New York. So let me explain. In New York, you have you have three different types of property. You have the townhouses, which are insanely expensive. So unless you've got $7 to $10 million, you won't be investing in those. But you have two different types of what I call apartments. You have co-ops and condos. Now, in a condo, which is short for condominium, it's quite straightforward. You purchase the apartment and it's yours. You can freely do whatever you want with it. You live in it or you can rent it out. A co-op is slightly different. Now, a cooperative works in this kind of way. So just bear with me for a minute. You have like a corporation that owns the whole building. And when you buy that co-op, you have what is called a share in that building. So you get also what is like a lease that authorizes you to live in this apartment, in the unit. Now, why is that bad? Well, before you even buy the property, you have what is called a board of directors. You have a board of directors in a condominium as well, but they don't have as much power. Now, the board of directors in a cooperative have a lot of power. What does that mean? Before you even buy and go to that property, they actually have the right to look at your bank statements or your past history. And what often happens is that because if you're a foreigner or indeed you're not a New Yorker, it's very difficult for them to give you a kind of what is called the green light and buy the property. So what often happens is that in a co-op, you only get New Yorkers that buy those type of properties because it can be almost impossible for a foreigner to buy, or even, as I was saying, somebody from outside of the New York area. And this goes with actually, if you want to rent the property, which is important to you as well. If you want to rent that property, you got to get the go-ahead from the board of directors, and quite often they won't give you that authority. So it becomes almost impossible for a foreigner or a non-New Yorker to buy a cooperative. So as an investment vehicle, it's really, really not for you. And that also means that the choice becomes very limited because there's actually a lot more co-ops than there are condos. There's actually around 75% or more of apartments in New York are cooperatives, although I think the number of condos is increasing. And condos are nicer because they're actually newer. Co-ops tend to be older. But what I'm saying is, it's very, very limited. You're very limited in what you can buy in New York. So that gives you five what I think are quite significant disadvantages of buying in New York. But I now also, before I want come to the advantages, I just want to tell you, when you purchase in New York, you're likely to pay about a couple of percent purchase costs. And what are these? You're as a foreigner or a non-New Yorker, you're more likely to buy a condo which will cost you $1 million or more, and they have a mansion tax, which is 1% of the price. So you're likely to pay that. You'll also have to pay, let's say, 1% as well in other costs. So you're likely to pay about 2% of the price of the condo if you're buying cash. If you're taking out a mortgage, you'll pay around 6% of the loan or the mortgage cost, around that. That's not too bad, but the selling expenses are quite high in New York because it's the seller. If you ever want to sell in the future, it's the seller that normally pays the broker, and that is normally about 6%. But you need to factor in another 2% for other costs, like legal and taxes, etc. Costs of selling the property. So factor in 2% max for buying and about 8% for selling, which in themselves are quite high. I haven't put that as a sixth disadvantage because you get that in other countries too, but I just wanted to let you know. But now I want to come to the advantages. I've been quite negative, I think, in the first part of this video. I want to be a little bit more positive now and say there are also five quite good advantages of buying in New York. The rental yields for a typical New York apartment are about 5%, and net, if you take off taxes and other fees, they come to around 2.5% net. Now, I'm not saying that's a lot, but if you buy a studio in New York, studios can give you, the smaller the apartments, studio one bedrooms, the higher the yields. And studios, you can often get 7% gross. That's quite a decent yield. So even net, that can give you just 3.5% or perhaps a little bit more. That's not bad for a big city, a mature market. It's certainly higher than a place like London or Paris, where the yields are lower. So I think New York in that respect is quite good and has quite an advantage. Now also, when it comes to buying in New York, you will pay as a foreigner the same costs as you would for a local when purchasing the apartment. So there's no differential there. There's no extra, for example, cost for foreigners like there is in certain, I think Canada introduced that. I think Toronto, I believe, or Vancouver, one of those introduced extra taxes for purchasing if you're a foreigner. But that will not be the only place. There are other places around the world that do that. But that's not the case in New York. What I also like about New York is that when you do get somebody who rents your property in New York, they're likely to rent it for quite a while. And why is that? Because the upfront fees are quite high. And because tenants have to pay those heavy fees, they're not going to just rent it for a year. They'll tend to stay for a number of years in your apartment. So that will give you rent quite consistently. So that's good for long term. Now, also, what I like about New York is that because you've got quite a limited space, you tend to get apartments, whatever, they tend to keep appreciating over a number of years. When I mean a limited space, in particular, if you compare it to somewhere like London, where I will do a video on London as well, where I think London is still worth buying in for the long term. But if you compare the two main financial centers of the world, New York and London, New York, I think, actually has a bit of an advantage over London. And what do I mean by that? Bear with me and take this into consideration. New York and London have similar populations, but New York has only about half the space of London. So what does that mean? That means there's more scope for, and I know New York it tends to build higher than London. But nevertheless, if you just take the area of New York, being half the size of London, it I think will appreciate more in the future because of such limited space. You also have to consider this. London is actually, considering the space, you would expect New York property to be twice as expensive as London, but it actually isn't. It's less than 40% more expensive per square meter or square foot than London, despite this. And also you have to take into consideration another factor when you compare it with London, which it's its main financial rival. Listen to this. The average New Yorker earns about $75,000 to $80,000 a year. Now the average Londoner only earns about $50,000 a year. So that means that New York should be a lot more expensive in property than London. But that just isn't the case. If you consider the limited space in New York, if you consider New Yorkers earn 50%, often 40 to 50% more than Londoners, I think New York is still a good investment from that point of view. I still think it's got a long way to go. And my final fifth point on New York is the prestige. Now, I know a lot of people out there do not like New York as a city, and there are many criticisms of it. But if you consider, if you ask anybody in the world, name your most important city, one city you can think of in the world, the most important city, many will name New York, even ahead of London or Paris. Particularly from a world perspective, no, maybe not so much in Europe, but if you look at it from a world perspective, I still think New York is the most prestigious city in the world, and everybody wants a piece of it. So I give that as a fifth reason why I think there's still an advantage in buying in New York. Now, before I conclude, I want to just give you one other thing. New York is quite complicated from a tax perspective when it comes to selling your property. You'll pay between about 25 to 30% capital gains tax. But that also depends on how you're set up when buying in New York. Don't necessarily buy as an individual. You could buy as a New York LLC, or potentially even a company that owns the New York LLC. So before you do buy in New York, you have to take tax advice. Unfortunately, it's beyond the scope of my knowledge, and it's beyond the scope of this video. But if you do decide to go ahead and buy in New York, please, please, please do take tax advice, because whether you go as an individual, whether you go as an LLC, whether you go as a company that owns this LLC, will depend on your tax circumstances. And again, if you're a foreigner, watch out for death taxes. Now, when you sell your property, when it comes to capital gains tax and other taxes, you will have the same rights as anybody from the US. But when it comes to death taxes, you're actually more exposed than a potential New Yorker or somebody from the US. So please, again, do take financial advice, and if you may have to actually set up as a company to lower these taxes. So in conclusion, should you buy in New York? I'm going to give New York a kind of tentative thumbs up, and I'll tell you why. Because of its limited space, it's very prestigious. I still think there'll be scope for growth in the future. And also, again, as I go back to the other point, if you ask anybody from the Americas, from Asia, or from Africa, which is the number one city in the world, they're more than likely to give you a response as New York. And that's why I will give New York a thumbs up. But it's only for, I think, somebody who's got a lot of money, which unfortunately I don't. I don't have millions of dollars to spend on an apartment. And also, if you're one of those people, I think it's ideal if you're one of those people that has quite a bit of cash to spend and also wants pretty decent appreciation for the future. Again, it's a mature market, so you're not going to get 20% growth a year. But if you're one of those that has a lot of money and wants pretty decent appreciation for the future, maybe 8 to 10% a year, including rental yields, then I think New York is for you. So for that reason, I'm going to give New York a thumbs up. Anyway, I hope you've liked this video. If you do, please put a like. Please comment in the videos, in the comments below the video. And also, what I do want for my my Save and Invest channel is for you to give other people advice on this channel. So comments below do help, because if somebody is potentially thinking about buying in New York, they'll watch my video, they'll get ideas from my video, they'll get points from my video, but they also may get some extra points below in the comment section. If you're good at taxation in New York, please put some comments below, and you may help potentially somebody who wants to buy a property, a condo in New York. Anyway, thanks ever so much for watching this. I think that maybe I've probably spoken a little bit too much in this video, but thanks very much. I'll see you on the next video, and have a great day.